When people talk about sacred words, they often imagine dusty manuscripts, distant rituals, or ancient voices speaking from some unreachable age. But the truth is far softer, far closer, closer than the breath resting behind your lips right now. That closeness is where this part of our journey begins. Not in a temple, not in a monastery, but inside the very space you're sitting in, because awakening never waits for the perfect place. It slips in during ordinary moments and turns them luminous. And so did it for a young seeker named Elias, a quiet soul who had spent years feeling both drawn to something higher and strangely exiled from it at the same time. Elias had always carried a subtle ache, an intuition that something vital was missing, though he couldn't give it a name. He wasn't lost in a dramatic way, he simply felt disconnected, like he had been unplugged from warmth and purpose for so long that the emptiness began to feel normal. One evening, overwhelmed by the quiet noise in his mind, he opened an old notebook where he'd scribbled thoughts, questions, and dreams over the years. But tucked between random pages, he found something he didn't remember writing, the first line of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. He stared at it for a long moment. These words, repeated millions of times across centuries, suddenly felt strange, new, almost encrypted. As if the sentence were gently tugging him to read it differently than he ever had. He whispered it aloud, not out of devotion but curiosity. And when the words left his mouth, something stirred, not outside, but deep within his chest, where intuition breathes. For the first time, Elias didn't imagine a figure above the clouds. Instead, the phrase, Our Father, opened in his mind like a door swinging inward, revealing something startlingly intimate, a presence he had ignored for years. A presence woven into his breath, his heartbeat, the quiet intelligence behind his thoughts. It wasn't an external authority. It felt like origin, like the place he came from before he learned his name. And the more he sat with that feeling, the more he realized that this Father wasn't a person at all, but a source. A seed. A consciousness he had been carrying without noticing. Then came the next phrase, Who art in heaven. Elias had always assumed heaven meant a realm somewhere far above the physical world. But that night, the word shifted. It softened. He felt as though heaven wasn't an altitude but a state, a higher frequency, a space within him where clarity lived like a silent lamp. It wasn't elsewhere. It was right there, waiting. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, and something surprising happened. His thoughts began to sink, like a stone settling at the bottom of a lake. And in the stillness that followed, the meaning formed gently. Heaven is the quiet part of you where the divine waits to be noticed. Not a castle in the sky. Not a location. A level. When he opened his eyes again, the room hadn't changed, yet everything felt different, lighter, as though the edges of the world had softened. Even the shadows on the walls seemed to breathe with intention. He whispered the next phrase, Hallowed be thy name. This was the moment something clicked. Hallowed meant sacred. But, thy name. Elias paused. Could a divine source truly have a name? There were hundreds, Jehovah, Elohim, the ineffable, the unspoken. But none of them felt complete. And then he remembered something he had once read, in many mystical traditions, that the name of the divine is not a word but a vibration, something closer to breath than language. A pulse of consciousness. A frequency that shapes the world from silence. Suddenly he wondered, what if the name being hallowed is the breath itself? What if every inhale speaks the divine into being? Because every living thing on earth breathes. Every creature, every moment of life, rises and falls on this invisible wave. He inhaled slowly, feeling the air pour into him like warm light, and this time it wasn't just breathing, it was communion. On the exhale, he let go of his tension, his worry, and his sense of being small. The breath carried all of it away. And within that single, simple movement, Elias understood something he had chased for years: the sacred wasn't far. It had never been far. It was the life moving through him every second. It was the awareness watching his thoughts. It had always been there, waiting for him to remember. The room felt almost charged now. Not with drama or visions, but with a gentle hum, like a tuning fork resonating in his chest. He placed his hand over his heart, not out of sentiment but instinct, and a warmth spread beneath his fingers. A recognition. As if something inside him whispered, "There you are. I've been here the whole time." Elias didn't speak again. He simply sat, breathing softly, letting the ancient words unfurl in a way he had never experienced. The prayer was no longer a prayer, it was a map. A code. A doorway. And each phrase felt less like an instruction and more like an invitation to return to the source he had forgotten. In that quiet moment, he realized that awakening is not some grand lightning strike. It is remembering something your soul has never stopped knowing. It is rediscovering a warmth you thought you lost but had only stopped feeling. The ancient words had not changed. He had. And that change was enough to awaken a sense of belonging he had long abandoned. What Elias felt that night wasn't an answer. It was a beginning, a small, glowing return to the truth within him. And though he didn't know it yet, this first line of the prayer would soon unlock a series of revelations that would reshape not only how he prayed, but how he lived, how he loved, and how he understood his place in the universe. The breath settled. The silence deepened. And inside that silence, the ancient voice of the divine stirred again, this time not as a distant father but as the shining, living source that had always been speaking through his own heartbeat. Elias returned to the prayer the next evening, not out of habit, but out of a quiet pull he couldn't ignore. The previous night had left him with a lingering clarity, soft, steady, and strangely alive. It followed him like a warm breeze throughout the day, during conversations, during work, even in moments when his mind tried to drift back into old patterns of worry. Something had opened, and though he didn't fully understand it yet, he knew he needed to keep going. This time, he read the next phrases aloud, gently, as though they were made of glass. "Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. On earth as it is in heaven." The first line trembled inside him. Thy kingdom come. Elias had always imagined the kingdom as a realm far away, a golden world tucked beyond the sky, unreachable until death. But tonight, the words rearranged themselves as they reached his mind. The kingdom wasn't somewhere distant. It wasn't waiting for some holy event at the end of time. It felt more like something pressing inward, wanting to bloom through human consciousness. Not a place, but a presence. A higher state of being that quietly asks, "May I rise through you?" Elias lifted his eyes toward the dim corner of his room, and a realization brushed against him like a soft hand: the kingdom comes whenever a human remembers who they truly are. It arrives in awareness, in honesty, in the courage to see the divine where the world has taught us to see only emptiness. Slowly he placed his palms together, not in prayer, but in alignment. "Thy will be done," he whispered. And for the first time in his life, the phrase didn't feel like submission. It didn't feel like bending to an authority. It felt like opening a window. He breathed again, and inside the breath was the understanding: the divine will isn't a command, it's a harmony. a natural expression of the highest truth within us. It's what happens when fear loosens, when ego softens, when the inner light stops fighting its own shine. The will of the divine was not something imposed, it was something revealed. Elias held that sense gently, as though he were holding a small bird. On earth as it is in heaven. Last night, he had realized heaven was an inner state, a layer of consciousness untouched by noise or confusion. Tonight, the next step appeared: let that inner clarity shape the outer world. Let what is silent within you become visible around you. Let the subtle light you find in your chest spill into your words, your relationships, your choices, your presence. He realized this line wasn't asking humans to wait for heaven. It was asking humans to release heaven through themselves. The prayer was beginning to feel less like an ancient ritual and more like a design, an architecture for awakening. And as the realization deepened, so did the next part of the prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. This line, more than any other, had always puzzled Elias. As a child, he thought it meant literal food. As he grew older, it felt symbolic, but vague. Only tonight did its meaning finally settle into place. Bread wasn't just sustenance. It was essence. The stuff that nourishes the soul, not the body. And reading it now, Elias felt something stir, something warm, like a rising sun. The mystics had once called it super-essential bread. The nourishment that comes not from the world, but from the source. The inner food that the soul recognizes the moment you remember your origin. It is the quiet answer to the quiet hunger that lives beneath every other hunger. Elias closed his eyes and let the words sink. Give me today the nourishment that awakens me. Give me the clarity I need, not the distractions I want. Give me the light that feeds the deepest part of me. The room felt different again, charged, but gentle. As if the air had thickened with a presence that wasn't quite visible, yet unmistakably there. Elias let his hands fall to his lap. His breath deepened, and he realized something profound: he wasn't asking for anything external. The bread had already been given. It was awareness itself, the thick, glowing pulse of consciousness that had begun to steady inside him. He understood now that daily bread meant daily awakening. A daily reminder of the kingdom within. A daily return to the breath, the name, the source. And in that stillness, another revelation formed naturally: awakening is not a one-time event. It is a rhythm. A nourishment. Something you must receive repeatedly, gently, like a field receiving the morning light. As the meaning of these lines settled inside him, Elias felt an unexpected calm, a calm that didn't depend on circumstances, or achievements, or answers. It was simply there, like a companion who had never once left. He realized that the divine wasn't waiting for him to be perfect. It wasn't demanding purity or certainty. It was offering sustenance. Quietly. Daily. Elias opened his eyes. He felt taller inside, rooted, yet lifted. Clearer than he had felt in years. And though he didn't know what the next lines of the prayer would unlock, a soft anticipation filled him, like the moment before dawn when the sky begins to brighten but the sun has not yet risen. There were still chains to understand, debts, temptations, shadows that lived in the corners of the soul. But for now, Elias simply breathed, letting the inner kingdom settle deeper into the earth of his being, knowing the next part of the prayer would bring its own light in its own time. Elias returned once more to the quiet corner of his room, though by now it felt less like a corner and more like a threshold, an inner doorway he stepped through each night. Something in him had grown steadier, more grounded, as though the words of the prayer were stitching together pieces of himself he didn't even know had been torn. The next lines waited for him gently, like someone holding out their hand. He spoke them slowly. "Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors." The word debts landed differently tonight. Elias didn't imagine money, or transactions, or failures written on some invisible heavenly ledger. Instead, the word pressed softly into places he rarely looked, the emotional knots he had carried for years. The grudges he let sit like stones beneath his ribs. The silent guilt he never spoke of, but which whispered to him whenever he felt joy, reminding him of mistakes he hadn't forgiven himself for. He closed his eyes. Debts were not numbers. Debts were weight. Every unhealed moment. Every wound he refused to acknowledge. Every person he still held in the shadows of blame. Every part of himself he couldn't embrace. He breathed deeply, and with every slow inhale, the concept began to unravel. The prayer wasn't asking him to be pious or noble. It was offering him a jailbreak. Forgiveness wasn't mercy, it was release. And not release for others, but for him. Because every time he held someone in resentment, he chained himself to the wound. Every time he refused to forgive himself, he reinforced the cage around his own heart. As we forgive our debtors. The reciprocity glowed with truth. You cannot be free while holding others captive in your memory. Elias felt a tremor move through him, small, but unmistakable. Faces rose in his mind, slowly, like silhouettes emerging from fog. People he hadn't thought about in years. People he had written off as handled, though the criticism he still felt toward them revealed otherwise. And there were pieces of himself too, earlier versions of him that he had abandoned, ashamed of their fear or ignorance. He whispered softly, "I release you." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was simply honest. A small surrender of the stories he'd been repeating internally for too long. The air in the room shifted as if something heavy had been quietly lifted from the space. Then he moved to the next line. "And lead us not into temptation." Temptation. A word so often misunderstood, twisted into fear, shame, or rigid morality. But tonight, Elias sensed something different beneath it. Temptation wasn't about forbidden pleasures. It was about premature power. The kind the ego wants before the soul is ready to hold it. The kind of power that inflates you rather than awakens you. He understood now that temptation pulls you toward shortcuts, toward illusions that promise wholeness without transformation. It invites you to bypass the hard work of awareness and leap straight into fantasies of significance. Temptation whispers, you can be powerful without being honest. You can influence without being grounded. You can shine without doing the inner clearing that light requires. Elias sat with this quietly. He recognized the subtle temptations in his own life, the desire to appear wise instead of becoming wise, the urge to avoid discomfort rather than grow from it, the longing for validation that felt like connection but never truly was. He felt the truth ripple inside him. Temptation is never external. It rises where the ego sees an opportunity to feel full without becoming whole. He breathed slowly, letting the understanding settle. Finally, the last line of the prayer approached like a deep exhale. "But deliver us from evil." This too shifted instantly. Evil had always been painted as a monstrous force outside humanity, something lurking in darkness, waiting. But tonight it appeared differently. Not as a creature, not as a threat, but as a profound forgetting. Evil was the loss of self. The collapse into the smallness that comes when the divine center is obscured. It was the moment you believe the lie that you are only your wounds, your failures, your illusions, and nothing else. Deliverance, then, was not rescue from an external enemy. It was the gentle tearing away of false identities. The soft but powerful act of remembering who you truly are beneath every fear and every mask. Elias felt something loosen inside him, like an old knot untying after years of tension. He whispered the line again, slower, "Deliver us from evil." And inside those words he sensed a deeper request, "Bring me back to myself. Restore the part of me that remembers the source. Remove the illusions that keep me from my own light." Something in the air thickened, warm and present, as though the unseen had moved closer, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniably real. It wasn't saving him from danger. It was revealing him to himself. Elias sat there for a long time, unmoving. The prayer had unfolded itself fully now, its secrets revealed one line at a time. It was no longer a ritual, no longer a formula. It was a subtle ascension, a ladder for consciousness disguised as simple language. He exhaled slowly, and the breath felt like completion. Like release. His body felt lighter, as if his ribs had expanded into a more spacious version of himself. And beneath all of it was a quiet, steady truth: awakening is not spectacular. It is soft. It is personal. It is a series of gentle unveilings that, over time, restore the original clarity that was never truly lost. The room dimmed as the night deepened, yet inside Elias, a new dawn had begun quietly rising, one that had nothing to do with sunlight and everything to do with remembering. Elias didn't expect anything more to happen. He thought the prayer had already revealed its deepest layers, leaving him transformed in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. But transformation rarely ends where the mind expects it to. And on the night he believed the journey was complete, something even more profound unfolded, something that didn't arrive through words, but through presence. He sat down again, though this time he didn't open the notebook. The prayer was already living inside him, breathing through him. Instead, he simply closed his eyes and let his awareness rest where the deepest calm had begun to grow. There was no agenda. No searching. Just a soft settling into the space behind thought, where silence had become strangely welcoming. As he breathed, Elias felt the remnants of himself, the versions built from fear, expectation, and years of living on autopilot, begin to soften. Not disappear, but loosen their grip. It was as though the prayer had quietly rewired his inner landscape, creating pathways where clarity could move without resistance. The lines he had whispered over the past few nights rose again, but now they weren't words. They were movements of energy, unfolding without sound. Our Father, the Source. Who art in heaven, the higher self within. Hallowed be thy name, the breath, the sacred vibration. Thy kingdom come, the inner light awakening. Thy will be done, the alignment, the harmony. Give us our daily bread, the nourishment of awareness. Forgive us, the release. Lead us not, the guidance back to clarity. Deliver us, the return to truth. Each phrase shimmered inside him like a chord in a symphony. And together, they formed something he had not expected, a sense of home. Not home as a place, but as belonging, an intimate recognition of himself as more than a person struggling through life. He felt like a being rediscovered, a consciousness remembering its own origin. As he rested in that stillness, something shifted, not dramatically, but undeniably. A warmth grew at the center of his chest, gentle at first, then expanding in slow, natural waves. It didn't feel supernatural. It felt correct, as though something long dormant had finally been given permission to breathe. The warmth rose into his throat, then toward his face, and he inhaled sharply, startled only by its softness. His body felt different, lighter, as though he were made of breath rather than weight. And in that glow, a simple realization emerged. The prayer had never been asking him to reach upward, it had been guiding him inward. Every line had been a step toward remembering that the divine was not a destination. It was the core of his being. He placed a hand over his heart instinctively. Beneath his palm, the warmth pulsed gently, like a quiet sun. And in that moment, Elias understood something he had never grasped before: the divine was not a concept. Not an idea. Not a belief. It was this aliveness. This presence. This quiet intelligence inside him that had always been waiting for recognition. A tear slipped down his cheek, not out of sadness, but from the overwhelming simplicity of it. For years, he had searched for meaning, for guidance, for answers. He had looked for signs of signs, for hidden messages behind every struggle. He had imagined awakening as a grand moment of revelation. But now he realized, awakening isn't something that happens to you. It's something that emerges when you finally stop resisting what has been true all along. Elias opened his eyes slowly. The room looked the same, yet it didn't. The edges of objects felt softer, as though the world itself had relaxed. Even the shadows held a kind of gentle honesty. He exhaled, and the breath left him like a blessing. For the first time in his life, he felt whole. Not perfect. Not enlightened. Just whole, complete in a way that no achievement or relationship or belief had ever given him. The fragmented pieces of himself, once scattered across memories, regrets, and unmet expectations, had quietly reassembled into something steady and real. He whispered one final phrase, not from duty, but from gratitude. Amen. But even this word unfolded differently. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a grounding, like placing both feet fully into the present moment. A soft declaration: it is so. I am here. I am whole. Elias stood, stretching gently, feeling the weightlessness inside his bones. Tomorrow, nothing dramatic would change. He would still go to work, still speak to friends, still live in the same city. But everything would be filtered through a new presence, a quiet awareness that moved through him the way a river moves through a valley, shaping gently, patiently, without force. The prayer had done its work. It had pulled him out of forgetting and returned him to himself. And though life would continue to offer challenges, shadows, and temptations, he knew now that the center within him was unbreakable. He could return to it, breathe into it, and rise from it at any moment. His journey wasn't over. But the part of him that once felt lost had found the path home. If this journey resonated with you, even in the smallest way, then something within you is already awakening. These ancient words are not relics, they are living tools, maps designed to guide the human soul back to clarity, presence, and inner truth. The story of Elias is not meant to be read as fiction alone. It is a mirror. A gentle reminder that your own inner landscape is filled with layers waiting to be rediscovered. Perhaps you felt a warmth in your chest during certain moments. Perhaps a quiet memory surfaced, or a long-buried question stirred again. These are not coincidences. They are signals, the subtle language of the soul when it begins to stretch back toward the light. Whether you come from a spiritual background or none at all, the movement toward awareness is universal. It belongs to every human being. Awakening is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is a returning, one breath at a time, one realization at a time, one honest moment at a time. And if Elias's journey showed anything, it is that the sacred is not somewhere far away. It is already inside you, waiting for the moment you become still enough to hear it. If you'd like more explorations like this, I'd love for you to stay connected. Sparkle subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next guided journey. Thumbs up, give this video a like if it brought you any sense of peace, insight, or clarity. Repeat button, share it with someone who might need a moment of stillness or a reminder of their own inner light. Your presence here truly means something. Thank you for walking this path with me.